Hi, I'm Rahel Philipose and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express News Show. In this episode, we talk about the impact of a legal dispute on the adoption process in Maharashtra. We also talk about Shankar and Richi, two lonely African elephants in India. But first, we talk about Prime Minister Modi's recent visit to Papua New Guinea. Last week, Prime Minister Narendra Modi made a diplomatic visit to Papua New Guinea to attend the Forum for Indo-Pacific Islands Cooperation Summit, or the FIPIC Summit. Now, what is worth noting is that this was the first visit to this specific country by an Indian Prime Minister ever. With China's growing dominance and the US's influence declining in the region, this forum is slowly becoming a central part of India's overall diplomatic agenda. To understand India's engagement with this region and the significance of Prime Minister Modi's recent visit, the Indian Express's Shubhajit Roy joins us in this segment. So to start with, Shubhajit, can you talk about how India's relationship with the Pacific Island countries has evolved over the years?
So, Rahel, Pacific Island countries, which we commonly refer to as PICs, it's a cluster of about 14 countries scattered across in the Southwest Pacific Ocean. Now, these are all very small islands, but two of them actually are relatively large in size. Those two are Fiji and Papua New Guinea. Now, India's engagement or interaction with the Pacific Island countries historically was with Fiji, because in the late 19th century, actually in 1879, Indian workers were brought there under the indenture system to work on sugarcane plantations. Now, about 60,000 Indians were brought between 1879 and 1916. Indian traders also started going to Fiji. Now, in Fiji, there are about 8.5 lakh people of Indian origin. And earlier they were called sort of commissioners, and then later they were upgraded to High Commissioner after independence. Indira Gandhi was the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Fiji in 1981. Now, after that, there hasn't been a really concerted effort to engage with these Pacific Island countries. There were sporadic visits to some of these islands. For example, in 1996, India opened its High Commission in Papua New Guinea in Port Moresby, and Papua New Guinea opened its diplomatic mission in Delhi in 2006. So apart from these major two islands, there was not much engagement with these 14 very crucial island countries, which actually started in 2014.
Right. And 2014 was when PM Modi hosted the first FIPIC summit during his visit to Fiji. So what prompted the Pacific Island countries and India to set up this forum at the time?
So, broadly, these South Pacific Island countries have been under the influence of US, Australia, New Zealand, because they are the sort of the resident powers, as you call them. China started really aggressively entering that region in the South Pacific region at that time. Xi Jinping had become the president of China in 2012, 2013. And that influence operations by the Chinese was noticed by the Indian establishment back then. So in 2014, there was a realization that if India doesn't engage with these countries, and these countries were looking at other powers as well, beyond US, Australia, New Zealand, and China. And since India had the capacity in some niche areas, so for example, information technology, then in medical tourism, medical facilities, these are some of the areas where, or education for some of these kids in Indian schools and colleges. So all these are some of India's capabilities, which India thought that it would be able to engage with these countries, citizens of these countries. And it really found ready willingness on the part of these Pacific Island countries who were ready to engage. And that's how the current engagement actually started.
Right. And speaking of China, what kind of role does it play in the region today? And have forums like the FIPIC challenged its dominance in any way?
So China has sort of made forays into these Pacific Islands through economic incentives, because that is what they know and understand best. For example, according to a paper by the Sydney-based Lowy Institute, China's development support peaked in 2016. Its loans and grants amounted to 8% of all foreign aid to the area between 2011 and 2017, when it surpassed the American development support to these countries. So if you really see China's trade volume with 10 of these Pacific Island countries increased more than 30 times from 1992 to 2021. In fact, China is the biggest trading partner after Australia and New Zealand for these Pacific Island countries. So obviously, because of this, them extending these financial incentives to these Pacific Island countries, they are under a certain amount of influence of the Chinese. So that's where India is thinking to reach out to these countries, understand their priorities, and not just throw money at them, but to help them build their capacity. That it's easiest to throw money like the Chinese do, but it is much more difficult to educate them, train them, and build their capacity so that they can be self-sustainable when it comes to, and that is appreciated much more by people than just giving out doles in terms of loans and aid.
Right. So in the context of that, could you talk about how significant PM Modi's visit becomes?
So in that context, I spoke to a few experts, officials. One of them is an IDSS scholar, Shruti Pandalai. So she summed up the engagement with these island countries very succinctly. She says that PM Modi's visit to the Pacific Islands was impactful because of three reasons. One, it showed the gains India has made incrementally as a development partner to the strategic geography and has managed to establish what she calls a reassuring presence in the region in a way that checkbook diplomacy cannot achieve. With checkbook diplomacy, she is referring to the Beijing's model or China's model of throwing money. Two, the overwhelming welcome for PM Modi by the PIC leaders and the Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister Marape's reposing of faith in India as the voice of the global South is significant, given that India's G20 presidency is committed to being a bridge builder in a polarized global order. So basically, India is now positioning itself as the leader of the global South. So that's where this particular visit was also important, because it can represent the interests of these Pacific Island countries at the G20 summit. And three, it also underscores how India is increasingly carving its space as an alternative to countries who don't want to get caught in the crossfire of binary choices in the Indo-Pacific. So essentially, India is giving a positive alternative, or at least trying to capture that space.
And Shubhajit, can you tell us some of the key outcomes of this year's summit?
So I think this time India made it clear that it was a friend in need, and it had supplied vaccines during the pandemic, and it said that it is ready to be helpful to these countries in areas of healthcare, cyberspace, also to address their water scarcity issues. And similarly, so that is one of the things that, India basically told them that what are their priorities, and according to them, according to those priorities, India can extend help, support in those areas.
So going forward, do you think Modi's visit is a step in the right direction for India?
So Modi's visit, I think he listed out about 5-10 initiatives, from a super specialty cardiology hospital in Fiji to setting up dialysis units in all these countries, to sea ambulances, to high quality medicines at affordable prices, to yoga centers. So there's a range of sort of initiatives, including scholarships for about 1,000 people from every year for the next 5 years from these Pacific Island countries. I think this menu of options that has been presented for these countries is a very, very important and significant start. So I think it will depend on how it is operationalized, how these initiatives are implemented on ground, and how these countries perceive India vis-a-vis China and US and Australia and New Zealand, which are in the vicinity. So that will be the challenge, and India has to deliver on all these issues to become a factor to matter in the affairs of the Pacific Island countries.
And next we talk about the adoption process in Maharashtra. In September 2022, a couple in Europe received news that they would be able to adopt a 10-month-old child from a Mumbai-based adoption center. However, their plans were disrupted because of a Bombay High Court directive. Now, it's important to note that Maharashtra has the highest number of adoption centers and it accounts for the highest number of adoptions in the country. But the High Court's decision interrupted the adoption process for many people who were waiting for their cases to be resolved. To know more about the issue, my colleague Utsa Sarmin speaks to the Indian Express's Rupsa Chakraborty.
So, Rupsa, what is the reason that these adoption processes have been halted? I mean, where did the problem begin?
So in 2021, Rajya Sabha passed a bill where they transferred the power of issuing the final adoption order from court to the district magistrates across India. So before this bill came in power, it was the court who had the power to give the final adoption letter to the prospective parents. But the government noticed that there was a significant delay in issuing the final adoption letter from the court, because we know that there are very limited number of courts. We have shortages of judges, which was delaying the adoption process. And there were many parents who, like in India at present, the average waiting period for completion of adoption is 3 years. So because of this delay in giving the adoption order, this was further getting delayed, which was going around 3.5 years. So just to fasten the process and to provide the children to the adopted prospective parents, they decided to transfer the power to the district magistrate.
Right, and the Bombay High Court directive that came earlier this year, it halted this transfer of cases to the district magistrates, right?
Yes. So when in 2021 the bill was passed, all the file for the adoption was transferred from the court to the district magistrate. Now there was a large number of files which got transferred. Amid all of this, there were many parents who were expecting for the completion of the adoption process, but due to the transfer of the paperwork, this got delayed. So one of these parents from Mumbai's Kandivali region, they approached the Bombay High Court with the request to fasten their adoption process. And so while hearing this petition, the Bombay High Court wanted to intervene and understand why the central government decided to transfer the power from court to the district magistrate.
Okay, so that's why now all the adoption processes are halted. But Rupsa, you had written that the PAPs, or prospective adoptive parents, and policymakers, they had initially raised an issue against the 2021 Act. Could you talk about that?
So there are many uproars among the PAPs and policymakers who are saying that court, which is a judicial body, should have the final say in giving the final approval of the adoption order. Because they say that the advocates or the judges, they have studied law, they know how to read the legal documents, which a district magistrate who just qualifies as an executive officer of the government and appointed by the government don't have the legal knowledge to read through the papers. And for the safety and well-being of the children, it is essential that a person who has legal knowledge gives the final approval. Also, many activists and policymakers highlighted that the district magistrate are already overwhelmed with civic work. So they might try to just fasten the process without doing the legal dues or the background checking, which is essential in adoption process. So this might affect the well-being of the children or the streamlining of the adoption process.
And talking about the well-being of the children, can you tell us how are they and the PAPs getting affected by this directive?
Okay, so there are two type of PAPs. One domestic, which means interstate adoption, and other is international parents, which means inter-country adoption. So for domestic parents, they have the legal rights after their scrutiny and home check. When they select a child, they have the legal rights to take the child for pre-adoption or as called fostering. So after almost 2 months of fostering, they get an appointment with the district magistrate who give the final approval letter for adoption, which finalizes the adoption process. So in this case, due to the High Court order, domestic parents can take their children for fostering, but they cannot complete the legal process. For example, I spoke to a woman who has gotten the child for fostering, and it's been over 7 months that the child is with them, but they haven't been able to legally adopt her. As a result, this child who is 1.5 years old is not able to be admitted to schools, preschools, and there are relatives or neighbors who ask them about the child, and as the child is not legally adopted, they are not able to give them their legal surname or legal name. And also for the treatment of the child, so when a child is being taken to a hospital, they have to show all pre-adoption papers, because there are also legal issues while giving a child for treatment or for hospitalization. So these are the small legal issues that the foster parents or PAPs are facing because they don't have the final legal adoption letter.
And is this the case with international parents as well who are looking to adopt?
So for the international parents, it is more problematic and more troublesome because they don't have the fostering right. So they directly select the child once their background has been checked and their bank account, their home visit has been done. So directly select the child and they come to India for the birth certificate, and then they take the passport of the child and they take the child with them. And according to the Indian law, the amendment of the adoption process, only specially able children are allowed to be adopted by the international parents. So all the children who are being adopted by the international PAPs have some kind of health issues. So I spoke to one PAP based in Europe. They also waiting for the last 7 years. They were supposed to get the final approval letter on 11th of Jan, on the same day when the court issued the order to halt the ongoing adoption. The child has deformities in her leg and she needs to undergo surgeries, and they have taken appointments with the doctors because they thought that they will be able to get the child on time. Now, because of the delay, her treatment has also been delayed, and the international parents also complain that they are not being well coordinated, they are not being well informed. The government or the adoption centers are not keeping them informed about the procedure and the changes in the adoption process because of the court order. So for the international parents who are like thousands of kilometers away from their children, it is more painful, and as we know, adoption is itself an emotionally challenging journey, and due to the court order, it has further added to their misery and their plight without proper communication with the adoption center, proper guidelines or directives from the government. They don't know when they will be able to bring their child home and would be able to do the required treatment for their children.
Right, and Rupsha, what kinds of concerns does this legal dispute raise?
So, as we know, Maharashtra has the highest number of adoption centers, because of which we see Maharashtra records the most number of adoptions in India. Now, as we know, because of the stringent rules and several amendments, adoption has already become a very time-consuming affair, which is emotionally very draining for the PAPs. Because of this ongoing legal issues, parents are already waiting in the queue to finally or to get the legal rights of their children. This, in a long run, can discourage more number of prospective parents from adopting children who are in need of families. And many might choose other states, neighboring states like Gujarat or Karnataka for the adoption. And I also like to highlight, during the court hearing, Bombay High Court had clearly stated that parents who want to adopt or take the final adoption letter can directly approach the High Court. But to approach the High Court, they need the adoption file from the adoption centers. But as these centers don't want to offend the government or dispute with the ongoing legal issues, they are not giving the file to the PAPs. As a result, even though they have the option to fasten the process and rather than waiting for months without a decision, they are not able to approach the High Court. So this is one legal issue, I think, the one dispute that is ongoing in this legal battle. And I think the PAPs have also highlighted the High Court should intervene into the matter and inform the adoption centers, because there are many adoption centers in rural Maharashtra who are not informed about this line or about this option in the court order that they can pass on the adoption files to the parents so that they can approach the High Court directly. So I think there is a need for more transparency and better communication between the PAPs, the government and the adoption centers to smoothen the process and help these children, the needy children who are waiting for their parents to have the legal rights.
And in the end, we talk about two lonely African elephants in India. Shankar and Richie, the African elephants, which are the largest land mammals, are the only two remaining in India and are currently in two separate zoos. One is in Delhi and the other one is in the Mysuru Zoo. The Indian Express's Abhinaya Harigovind tells us more about them.
The one at the Delhi Zoo is called Shankar, and Shankar is about 27 years old. He got to the Delhi Zoo in 1998. So he was sent as a diplomatic gift from Zimbabwe, and he's been here since then. The one at the Mysore Zoo is called Richie. Richie was born at the Mysore Zoo itself, and he was born to two African elephants that were brought to Mysore from Germany. So Shankar actually has been the only African elephant at the Delhi Zoo from about 2001 onwards, because that's when the female elephant that Shankar was brought with died. And Richie has been the only African elephant at the Mysore Zoo from about 2016 onwards, which is when his father died. So these are essentially the only two African elephants in the country right now.
And Abhinaya tells us that the two zoos are facing a lot of challenges in trying to find companionship for Shankar and Richie. And this is a problem because elephants are known to be very social animals. And so to address Shankar's loneliness, a petition was moved in the Delhi High Court in 2021.
It actually asked for Shankar to be moved to another place where he can live with other African elephants. So this would mean like a sanctuary somewhere abroad, since India doesn't have any other African elephants.
But Abhinaya says that the Delhi High Court observed last year that Shankar cannot be moved abroad.
So then this leaves the Delhi Zoo with the other option of bringing in a female African elephant. So this is essentially what the Delhi Zoo has been grappling with. The Mysore Zoo is dealing with a similar problem, though the High Court is not involved in the Mysore Zoo's case. But it is dealing with a similar problem of having an African elephant that is housed singly, a social animal that is housed by itself. And the Mysore Zoo is also facing a similar conundrum of whether or not they should bring in another African elephant and whether they can actually bring in another African elephant.
Now, both the Delhi and Mysuru zoos have written to multiple international organizations like the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums, the European Association of Zoos and Aquaria, and the International Zoo Services in search of female African elephants.
Also, the Delhi Zoo has uploaded Shankar's information and the fact that they are looking for a female African elephant onto a platform that's called Species 360, which is a platform for zoos across the world. And officials in the Mysore Zoo have also said that they have put out a similar request. They have written to zoos abroad asking for a possible female elephant that would be around the same age as these two elephants, which is a female elephant that would be in its 20s.
But so far, they haven't received any positive reply from the associations they had written to. Now, this isn't the only problem faced by the Delhi and Mysuru zoos while searching for the perfect mate for Shankar and Richie.
Like the European Association of Zoos and Aquaria pointed out, some foreign zoos may not have a suitable elephant in the sense that they may not have a female elephant of around the same age. That could be one problem. Another thing is that if these two zoos, when they do decide to bring in another elephant, would have to factor in a whole set of other things, which includes international transport, which is expensive in the case of a fully grown elephant. because male African elephants can weigh about 4,000 to 6,000 kg. So since transport is going to be expensive, that's one thing. Another thing is that keeping elephants in captivity is itself challenging for zoos, as somebody in the Union Ministry had pointed out. So the other aspect that an official at the Mysore Zoo pointed to was the fact that European and American zoos are also part of associations. So it's not just individual zoos that would then have to approve these requests, but these requests would also have to be approved by these associations. So then you basically need to have zoos that are willing to send an elephant to India. And if the Delhi or the Mysore Zoo does decide to bring in another elephant, there are of course a lot of permissions that they would have to get. There are a lot of approvals that would have to be taken. So one is a CITES permit, which would be necessary to import an animal. Another permission that they would have to get is from the Central Zoo Authority, of course, as well as from the Directorate General of Foreign Trade. And the elephant would itself have to be subjected to a lot of tests, and there would essentially be a lot of approvals to be taken before this can actually be finalized.
But even if all these issues are resolved and elephants are brought to India, the challenges will not stop. Here, Abhinaya says why that is the case.
The Union Ministry had pointed out that it goes back to the problem of keeping an elephant in captivity, because African elephants particularly are really large animals. They're the largest land mammals in the world. And a male African elephant can weigh about 4,000 to 6,000 kg. That is one aspect. So there is a lot that goes into the care of these animals. They require enclosures that are large enough to house them. So according to the Central Zoo Authority guidelines, one pair of African elephants would need an enclosure that's about 5,000 square meters. Right now, Shankar is housed in an enclosure that's about 4,930 square meters big. So you would need enough space to accommodate elephants. So the committee that had been formed on the orders of the High Court last year had actually pointed to the fact that you would have to bring in 3 elephants, which is 2 female and 1 subadult male elephant, in order to ensure that the social structure of the African elephant is maintained in some way. So if you are in fact bringing multiple elephants in, then you would need enough space to take care of them, as well as the staff strength to ensure their welfare.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was hosted by me, Rahel Philipose, and written and produced by Utsa Sarmin, me, Rahel Philipose, Shashank Bhargava and Anwiti Singh, who originally spoke to Abhinaya Harigovind for the last segment. It was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.